Hear now from the word of the Lord, as is written in the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Amen. And reading from book Divine Love and Wisdom, this is a portion of number 78. It appears as though the divine were not the same in one individual as in another, being seemingly of a different character in a wise person than in a simple one, for example, or of a different character in an elderly person than in a young child. But this is, owing to the appearance, a fallacy. A person may be of a different character, but the divine is not of a different character in him. The person is a recipient, and a recipient or receiving vessel is variable. The wise person is a recipient of the divine love and wisdom more amply, thus more fully, than the simple person, and the elderly person who is at the same time wise more than the young child or juvenile. But still, the divine is the same in the one and in the other. It's likewise owing to the appearance a fallacy that the divine is not the same in angels in heaven as in people on earth, because angels in heaven possess an inexpressible wisdom that people do not. But the apparent difference lies not in the Lord, but in the recipients according with the quality of their reception of the divine. Amen. Our text this morning comes from Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. He makes the sun to rise on the good, on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. It's a common saying around people who talk about New Church doctrine that we say things like, it's a toss-off. Well, that influx is according to the receiving vessel. It's one of the most profound teachings, however, and we have it because it brings so many things that exist in the world of nature and in the spiritual world to an orderly whole. As we were reading, it says in the Divine Love and Wisdom passage, life, all life, the force that brings even the lowest things of nature, the molecules, the grains of sand, brings these things into existence, has its one and only source in God the Creator. That life force pours out from Him to create the universe and recreate it every second. Nothing lives from itself. If this source were to stop even for an instant, everything would cease to exist. It's not like, you can get it started and then pull the plug and it keeps running. We are only dead vessels designed to receive life from God. The life that inflows to all things in the created universe, including us, is everywhere the same. There is just one life. As Jesus said in our text, his sun rises on the evil and the good equally. But what does this mean to us? Well, take, for example, the electricity that comes into our homes. It's exactly the same in every outlet. If you plug in a blender in the kitchen, you get one kind of response. If you take a TV and plug it into that same outlet, you get something entirely different. And it doesn't matter what room you plug them in, the electricity is everywhere the same. The vessels, the machines that we built to receive that influx, that energy, We're created to use that energy in different ways. It's the use that the vessel was designed to serve that makes the difference. Or we can think about the light from the sun. The white light that comes from the sun actually contains all colors. And this can be demonstrated with a prism or a rainbow. When something to us appears red, it's because the object is absorbing the white light from the sun and absorbing all the colors except red, which is what bounces out and comes into our eye. The sun produces just one kind of light. When sunlight falls on the leaf of a green plant, the energy in the light works with the chemicals in the leaf, like chlorophyll and the presence of water, to react with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to make the food that feeds the plant, and enabling it to grow and reproduce without needing to move around. The exact same sunlight shining on human skin creates a completely different chemical reaction. It doesn't produce food. Instead, it produces the vitamin D, an essential nutrient for good health. The concept of influx, inflowing energy, it means influx is just a Latin word meaning flowing in. It's according to the receiving vessel, also explains death. Why do living things die when they do? When the physical structure is no longer able to be a recipient for inflowing life. Things like disease or injury or just plain wearing out can damage the vessel until it can no longer receive and contain life. Now that we've looked at some familiar illustrations from the world of nature, let's go and look at some of the spiritual causes that also that's represented by these natural things. The Lord's life flows out from himself. Think of him as the source of all things, sort of some kind of energy force. And it's the amount of energy there is mind-bending and awesome. And if we were to receive it directly without some kind of accommodation or calming down, we would instantly perish. The outflowing energy from the Lord goes first into something he created. We read the book, we read about how the very first thing he created was a thing called the spiritual sun, which in itself is dead. But he puts his life into that, and then the spiritual sun passes it on to us in a modified way that we can manage. The spiritual sun serves the same purpose as a transformer on the hydro line. And we know that in order for the lines that pass the church to, we've discovered that you have to run it at very high voltage to get it to go over long distances from the power plant to wherever you need to use it. So those lines up there are very high voltage. But if you ran those in the house, it would be very dangerous. And so we have a series of transformers, which are actually just dead things. The electricity flows in one side, and it causes electricity to go out the other side without actually being connected. And we get 125 volts for household use. Or, if you want to look at the human beings for a similar kind of example, we think of the placenta in the role of growing a fetus. It's an organ which stands between the fetus and the mother. It passes nourishment from the mother to the child without allowing the blood to mix. It's there, and the nutrients are passing, and waste products are passing the other way, but the blood never touches, which makes it possible for a child to have a different blood type than his mother. It's something essentially dead that allows life to pass through it in a modified way. It's like the spiritual sun. So after the Creator's life passes through this thing called the spiritual sun, it's softened and prepared further by being received by the angels of the highest heaven. They receive that life, and they serve a use of passing it on to the angels of the spiritual heaven, to the natural heaven, to the world of spirits, to associate spirits, to us. So it's all a stream of this, softening it down until it gets to when the life from the Lord arrives to us in our own minds and souls, it's of such a nature that we can receive it, and it can cause us to live and to be human beings. But now that we have an idea of the relationship between the Lord's universally inflowing life, or influx, and how it has a different effect on things based on how it's received, we can look at how that applies to our daily life. You can say, okay, this is all very interesting, but what does it mean to me now? Now, remember, we talked a little bit about how the story of creation is about infants, and we'll go back to that a little bit. What it's like to be an infant a few days old. When we watch them when they're little, we keep them all bound up because they like it better that way. But if you release them from their swaddling clothes, what happens? Their arms and their legs just go everywhere. They have no control. There's movement going on, things, the brain's practicing with things, but there's no controlled way. Nothing's happening. There's no direction. Even, sometimes they'll stick themselves in the eye. But what happens, you ever watch, what happens one day when the child's doing this, the arm's flailing around, and all of a sudden you notice the eyes start tracking it. Suddenly they notice their own hand and realize they can follow it. And what happens then is, somewhere in their brain, it's saying, hey, when I see this thing, there's this other thing going on back here. I wonder if they're connected. And a connection is made, so the child can now identify their own hand and begin to move it with conscious intention. This is called a neural pathway. The structure of the brain actually changes with these passageways that go through the corpus callosum. And because there's a physical change in the infant's brain, influx is according to the receiving vessel. The vessel of the brain has been changed by this simple action. And, we talk about how children practice and how they learn to crawl and then they learn to toddle and so forth. And there's a direct relationship between children learning to crawl and their later ability to read because of these connections that are being made. And as life flows in, it builds on these connections. The vessel changes to receive life in a more sophisticated way. Each thing that they learn, each activity they go through, creates a learned response that can be used as a building block for things to come beyond. Now expand that to the billions of things that we learn during the course of our life through our senses, through study, through experience. Add the choices we make and the experiences we have, both good and bad, that are the results of those choices. Like they say, there's no bad experiments. Even when it blows up, you learn something. We learn from our mistakes as well as we learn from the good things. And every one of those things changes the physical structure of the mind, of the brain. These billions of changes is what makes each one of us a unique individual with a unique use. And because these choices are retained in what's called the finest things of nature, there's a connection between the highest thing in our mind and the basis for what's going to be your spiritual character. It gets marked there. The changes and decisions are recorded there. They become the basis for angels that carry forward our unique personality to eternity. The teachings of the new church tell us that the Lord looks on humanity as if it were a grand man. And the people in it make up the various structures and organs according to various uses. We talk about how kidney spirits are ones who are in the world of spirits and examine people for whether or not they're really on the right course. Or blood spirits carrying oxygen, these kind of uses that go on. There's a whole story on the grand man, chapter after chapter of material that we could look at the correspondence of each organ and how they represent different societies in heaven with different uses. This leads us to consider that the Lord's life doesn't just flow into individuals, but it also flows in to communities and nations. Because we make up parts of the community. We're the neural pathways in a community. We're the neural pathways in our nation. So the way we behave and relate to our neighbors can affect how the Lord's life flows into our community and we can sense how different places may have different feels. This applies to heaven as well, where we find our eternal home based on the feel or character of the society of angels. There's a passage about how they walk, when you're looking for your eternal home, you walk along a path and you hear as we pass the villages or societies, you hear music. And some of them, in most places, you hear the music, I don't like that so much. And you keep going until finally you hear some music, the feeling, the affection that matches you, and you go, that's my home. That inflowing life resounds in a particular, unique way, and you respond to it. We can change how the Lord's life enters into a group or community by our own choices and actions. By volunteering to help in various ways. By taking a meal to someone when they're sick or maybe when a child is born. Taking care of your home. Just being consciously aware of what things might look like to others and make sure they're tidy. If people are grumpy and thinking unhappy things every time they drive past your house, that actually changes the spiritual nature of your neighborhood. On a higher level, how you structure your government and how you select the people to be responsible for those civic duties changes the vessel into which life can flow. Happy people who feel safe and cared for attract good spirits, which affect everyone in subtle ways. In the church, we've all noticed how something as simple as the number of people in church can affect how we feel. Just coming to church and worshiping with other like-minded people is a gift to others because it changes the vessel, that community that we formed here today, and uplifts the spirits of all. We know we should read the Word regularly, but that can be difficult. We have many things in life that sort of push it to the side. But making a commitment to join with others to read the Word changes the vessel and brings a comfort for being closer to the Lord and the support and friendship of others who are sharing this particular delight with you. Here's a reading from the Spiritual Experiences. This is from number 2960. It appears as if human thoughts from a person on earth or from a spirit move the Lord, when yet all things to the very least flow in from the Lord, thus into the person, not from the person. For I am taught that the fact is, when the life of the Lord flows into a subject fit to receive, heaven is moved, because the order is complete, and the receiving vessel, so to speak, is fit to receive. It's difficult when it's not fit, for then the qualities flowing in cannot cooperate. So unconsciously, each one of us can serve as a conduit, a transformer, as we receive the Lord's life and do things that have a positive effect on others. If you get nothing else out of all of this study of some sort of an obscure doctrinal concept, you need to remember the important lesson here is your choices matter. The choice you make, the experiences you have in the world of nature, make actual changes to the structure of your mind, your community, your church, and eventually even the spiritual world. Because by changing the receiving vessel, that is you change the way the Lord's life reaches you and everyone around you. So let's close with the following passage from the Arcana. This is from Arcana Celestia 64-67. There is only one kind of life, the Lord's, a life that flows into all people, but is received in varying ways. Indeed, the way it is received is determined by the character a person has stamped on his soul through the life he leads in the world. This being so, forms of good and truth are turned among the wicked into evils and falsities. But among good people, forms of good are received as forms of good and truth as truths. While he lives in the world, a person stamps on the purest substances composing his interiors a character that determines the way in which the Lord's life is received. It should be recognized that the life received from the Lord is the life of love towards the entire human race. Amen.